We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph and Meseches Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 55a. This daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below. And see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing if somebody engages in a homosexual act with a minor, and the minor in this situation is the nishkav, he's the one that is passive. So we know that in such a situation, the adult is chayiv, he is liable, but he is not liable if the minor is so young that his act of relations is not considered to be an act of relations. But there was a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. What age is that? According to Rav, we go by 9 years old, because at 9 years old, that's when we say that a boy's act of relations actively is considered an act of relations, and we follow that passively as well. However, Shmuel says we actually go by 3 years old, because by a girl, the time for relations it's considered to be an act of relations is 3 years old, and if the boy is passive, essentially we're going to consider at the same age as a girl, and therefore we go by 3 years old. And the Gemara now is in the middle of bringing a brisa which supports Rav. The brisa just said on the previous Amud that we're talking about a boy of 9 years old, and the understanding is here that, again, passively, even in that situation, the cutoff age is 9 years old, like Rav. And the brisa now continues, Habal habehema bein kedarka bein shelo kedarka. If somebody has relations with an animal, and it doesn't matter if it's in the normal fashion or in the abnormal fashion, and also let's say a woman who brings an animal upon herself, again, bein kedarka bein shelo kedarka, it doesn't matter if it's a normal act of relations or abnormal, chayiv, we're going to say liable in both of those cases. And the word chayiv over here at the end of the brisa is going not only on these two cases of, again, Baal HaBehema and Isha HaMevias HaBehema, but also going on that first case that we just mentioned, again, the case of a homosexual act with a zocher, with a male that is less than 9 years old. And again, that's why it supports Rav, because the cutoff time, the time where we consider the act of relations to be an act of relations even passively, is at 9 years old. And the Gemara continues, Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda darshaned Be'isha Shnei Mishkavos. When it comes to a woman, so there we say that both types of being with the woman, whether it's the kedarka or shelo kedarka, is going to be chayiv. Ubebehema mishkav echad. But when it comes to an animal, it's only by kedarka that it's considered to be chayiv. And Rashi here explains, Ubehema mishkav echad, the halok siv ba mishkavi. It doesn't say it in plural, whereas by Isha, as we mentioned earlier, it says it in plural. And Rashi says, what are we talking about over here? Ula inyan revia kamar. We're talking here about a situation with an animal. To ha'isha hanir ba'as lebehema. The point is as follows. If a woman is having relations with an animal, and so she's the passive one, mischayeves af shelo kedarka. So in that situation, we're going to say chayiv, even if it's in the abnormal fashion, if it's anally, kederech she mischayeves bevilas adam. We follow the same way that it works if she were with a person. Te'ilu bevilas adam lo itzrich Rav Nachman l'meimer. And Rashi notes, in terms of with a person, that Rav Nachman doesn't even need to say, that's obvious. To Kroi Tuva, there's many psukim. Masnisanika, you have many sources for that. Rav Papa nami lo matzi l'meimer ibcha. Rav Papa also, he couldn't be saying the opposite. Rav Papa is about to ask a question. And so the point over here is, again, when we're talking about with an animal, so in such a situation, if it's the Isha with the animal, it's Shnei Mishkavos. It doesn't matter if it's Kedarka or Shelo Kedarka. But if it is Bebehema, meaning to say if it's a man with a Behema, so then it's only Mishkavecha, then it's only when it is Kedarka. But the Gemara continues, Maskef lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks the following question, Adrabah, we should say just the opposite. Isha de'urcha, by a woman where she's having relations in a normal fashion. As Rashi says, when she has the relations, the act of relations in a normal fashion, there's a greater hana, there's a greater pleasure. So there, amishkav mechayev, amidah machrina lo mechayev, we should say that if she has relations with an animal, if it's in the normal fashion, we should say chayev. If it's not the normal fashion, we shouldn't say chayev. But behema, but in a situation of a man with an animal, delav urchi, that no matter what's going on over here, it's not a normal act of relations. So lechayev Allah, call nekev and nekev, so there it shouldn't matter where the act of relations happens, it shouldn't matter which nekev, which orifice. In all situations, we should say chayiv. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, zocher, that when it comes to a male, ben teisha shana v'yom, this is as we said before, once the male is 9 years old, if he's passive, that's considered an act of relations. And habal habehemen, when it comes to an animal, bein kedarka, bein shelo kedarka, this is a man with an animal, whether it's kedarka, shelo kedarka, so then we're going to say chayiv. V'isha hamevias habehema oleh, and a woman who has an act of relations with an animal, bein kedarka, bein shelo kedarka, again, it doesn't matter if it's kedarka or shelo kedarka, chayiv, we are going to say chayiv. And so therefore, you see from this brisa, you see not like Rav Nachman and not like Rav Papa, you see that it doesn't make a difference if it's a man with an animal, if it's a woman with an animal. In both scenarios, it doesn't matter if it's kedarka or shelo kedarka, we are going to say chayiv. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravina l'Rava, Ravina said to Rava, Hama'ora b'zocher, let's say a person has relations with a man, we're talking about a situation of mishkav zocher, but it's ma'ora, it's not a full act of relations. Rashi explains, Hama'ora shelo gamar biyaso, he didn't finish the act of relations. Ikolaman damar zu neshika sever halanekev, some say what it means is that the aver of the man, it just touches, that's all it does. V'ikolaman damar harazu hachnasas atara, some say the crown of the aver enters the davar muad, it's a tiny amount. Aval yoser al neshika, it's a little more than a shika, it's a little more than just mere touching. And Rashi points out, miu gabe arayas, when it comes to arayas in general, kaimol on hara kegmar bia, there we know that hara, just the beginning, is the same thing as doing a full bia. Techsib benida as mekora hara, because it says with regards to anida, we learn out from that pasuk as mekora hara that again, just the beginning of the act is enough. V'alfinan shar arayos minida behekesha de Rabbi Yonah. We learn all other cases of arayas from a hekesh, that's the hekesh of Rabbi Yonah. Ki es kol asher yasmi kol hatoiv v'sa'elu hukshu kulon zelazeh. All of the acts of arayos are compared, and so hachamai, and so therefore that's the question over here when we're talking about mishkav zocher. What's the halacha when it comes to ara? Again, mahu, what's the halacha? Hama'ora b'zocher mishkavei isha ksiv bei. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? By ma'ora b'zocher, there certainly we should say that it's chayav because mishkavei isha, that's referred to as mishkavei isha. Rashi explains, Mishkavei Isha Ksibei Bezacher. That's what it says. It says that the man lies with another man like he would lie with a woman. Umay Kamei Boile. So what's even the question? Called him Mechayev Isha, like we just said. Anything that's chayev by a woman, which we just said above, Ha'ar is enough. So Mechayev Nami Bei. So that's going to be Mechayev also when it comes to Mishkav Zacher. So that's not even a question. And so the Gemara instead says, Ella, rather, the question is as follows. Hama'ora bebehema ma. What if a person has an active relations with a behema, but it's just Hama'ora, it's just the beginning of the act, just the touching? What's the halach in that case? Amar Leis, I said to him, when it comes to the hara that's written by the sister of his father, when a person has relations with the sister of his father or the sister of his mother, it's not necessary. We say it's true by all arayas. Why do you have to write hara? As it says in the pasuk, it uses that language. We don't even need it to say that. We already said that all arayas are compared to nida, and it's true by all arayas. Why does it need to say it again over there? So so we can just apply it to hara de behema, and we're going to say that hara de behema is going to be chayiv. But the Gemara continues, Michdi, let us see, behema mechayve misas bezdin. When it comes to behema, an act of relations with an animal, that's something that's chayiv misas bezdin. There's a death penalty by court in that situation. So lamali the kasev lehara di da gabe chayve krisas. Why would the source for hara by an animal be from a case of achosav and achosima, which are just chayve krisas? There you're chayiv kares, you're not chayiv misas bezdin. Lichteve gabe chayve misas bezdin. Instead, the source really should come from some other case of chayve misas bezdin. Veligmor Chayve Misas Bezin, Mechayve Misas Bezin. That way we'll learn a case of Chayve Misas Bezin from another case of Chayve Misas Bezdin. The Gemara says that doesn't really matter. Hoel v'kule kra ledrasha hudaasi. Once already you're using the whole pasuk for a drasha. Ksivanami milsa de drasha. So we write something that is relevant to a drasha, and that becomes the source again, even though one case is kares and one case is Misas Bezdin. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rav Achtavoy Barami, may Rav Sheshas Rav Achtavoy Barami asked Rav Sheshas the following question. Hamaora ba'atzmo mahu. What if a person would touch his aver and he would have relations, so to speak, with himself? That's talking about shalo kedarko. What would be the halacha in that situation? And the Gemara continues, Amar Le, he said back to him, Kevastin, he said, you're bothering me with a question that's impossible, it can never happen. Amar Rav Ashi says, Mighty boylach, what's your question? Bekushi lo mashkachasla. First of all, when his aver is hard, that's not even possible to do that. Kimashkachasla b'meshamish mace. It's only going to be possible in a situation where the aver is mace, is dead, is soft. In such a situation, it's possible. So what's going to be in that case? It's very simple. Laman damar meshamish mace ba'arayus pater. According to the one who says that a person who's meshamish mace, a person who uses the aver by arayas and it is not a situation where the aver is hard, so we say over there, according to the one who says pater, so this is also hacha pater here, we would say pater. Ulaman damar chayiv, and according to the one who says chayiv, hacha mechayiv tarti, here actually you'd be chayiv too. He's doing it with himself, so mechayiv ha-shochev u-mechayiv ha-nishkav, he'd be chayiv because he's considered the active, the shochev, and he's also considered the nishkav, the passive, and therefore he'd actually be chayiv tarti, he'd be chayiv twice. And the Gemara continues, Boy Minei Rav Sheshas, they ask Rav Sheshas the following question, what if you have a non-Jew with an animal? What's the halacha? This is in terms of putting the animal to death. Because in the Mishnah it said that in a situation where there's bestiality, we put the animal to death, we stone the animal, and the Mishnah mentioned two reasons. The Mishnah said, first of all, the animal caused a takala, caused the person to be put to death, so therefore the animal should be put to death. And also, it's a kolon, it's like a shame, because now people will see this animal and they'll say, this is the animal that caused the death penalty of so-and-so. And so now we're asking specifically by a non-Jew, takala v'kolon ba'inan, do we need to have a takala and a kolon? Does it need to be that it caused the stumbling block and the shame? V'hacha, but over here when it's a non-Jew, takala ika kolon leka, here it is a stumbling block, it is a situation where you do have the death penalty to the non-Jew, and so therefore we should say the animal as well is put to death, but with regards to kolon, with regards to shame, we don't care about that by the Ovid Kochavim, by the non-Jew. O Dilmar, maybe takala, afapi shein kolon, it's enough if it's a takala, even if it is not a kolon. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Tani Sua, we learn the answer from the following when it comes to trees. Ma'ilonos she'in ochlin ve'in shosen ve'in merichin, when it comes to trees, they don't eat, they don't drink, they don't smell. Amra Torah hashche srof v'kala, but the Torah says they have to be destroyed, burned, they have to be completely destroyed if they're worshipped as avodah zarah. And why is that? Because they cause a stumbling block for a person. So if somebody convinces his friend to leave the path of life and go to the path of death, that's talking about a person who's inciting someone to worship avodah zarah. Alachas kama v'kama, certainly that should be true. And so the Gemara is saying from here that if that's true by trees, then certainly it should be true also by an Ovid Kochavim who has relations with the animal should be put to death. But the Gemara says, but according to that, Ovid Kochavim hamishtacha velebehemto. Let's say you have an Ovid Kochavim, a non-Jew who bows to his animal. Titzaru miktala, we should say the animal becomes forbidden and has to be put to death. But the Gemara says, does that make sense? Mika midi de Yisrael lo asar, or Ovid Kochavim asar. Would there be such a case where to a Yisrael, to a Jewish person, the halach is that if a Yisrael is mishtacha to behema, it does not become forbidden. The animal does not become forbidden. So certainly we're not going to say that to the Ovid Kochavim becomes asur. So of course that's not going to be true. But the Gemara still asks, Yisrael gufei litzar midi dehave arevia. The Gemara says that by a Jew, and also we should say that, let's say a Jewish person bows to an animal, we should say it should become forbidden, just like when a Jewish person, when it's revia, when you have a Jewish person engage in an act of bestiality, that's what we say happens to the animal. So the same thing should be true when the Jewish person bows to the animal. And the Gemara says, no, there's a distinction. Amar Abaye says, Zeh klono meruba, v'zeh klono mu'at. In this case, it's a very big shame, meaning in a situation of an act of relations with an animal, but in a situation of bowing down, it's not such a kolon, and that's why in that situation, we don't say that the animal becomes forbidden. But the Gemara says, one second, if it goes by how big the kolon is, but by the trees, the ein kolon and meruba, there the shame is not great. The Amra Torah, and yet the Torah says, hashches rofechala, they have to totally destroy, burn down the tree, again, if it's worshipped as avodah zarah. And so really, we're back to our question, why is it that we don't apply that to an animal? And the Gemara says, when it comes to animals, so there the Torah has mercy on them, and we don't want to put them to death in such a situation. And the Gemara continues, Rava says, Amra Torah, the Torah says, Behema nanis me'avera tehoreg, that only by an animal who derived benefit, who derived pleasure from the Avera, that's the animal that we put to death. But if, again, the animal was bowed down to, that is not sufficient. But the Gemara says again, but why is that different than trees? They ain't nenin me Avera. Again, they're not getting any benefit from that Avera when they're being worshipped. V'yomra Torah, hashches rofechala. And again, the Torah says you have to destroy the trees. Why do we say that the animals are different? And the Gemara says, again, by animals, the Torah has mercy on the animals, and we don't put them to death for this. And Rashi explains, if a non-Jew bows to his animal, there certainly there would be a takala shunereg al yada, because the Ovid Kochavim will be killed because of that. Titzar habehema liyisrael banav and niktal behema. So we should say that the animal is now forbidden for a Jew to get benefit from that animal, and we should kill that animal. And the Gemara then answered, could it be possible that by a Jew that wouldn't be true? The animal wouldn't be asur. Lo mitzar behemto bishtachavo aso. The animal would not be forbidden when the Jew bows down bound to the animal. We've established that animals do not become prohibited if they're worshipped. From the fact that the pasuk says that when an animal is worshipped, it can't be brought as a carbon. That implies that in general it is permitted. You can't bring it as a carbon, but for other purposes you can get benefit from that animal. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from our Mishnah. Again, this is to the question that was asked of Rav Sheshes by a non-Jew that has relations with an animal. The question is over there. So you have a takola, but you don't have kolon, you don't have shame. The question is, do we put the animal to death? We'll try to prove it from our Mishnah. The Mishnah gave a second reason why we do put the animal to death when a Jew has relations with the animal. Another reason why we put the animal to death, shalote behema overas b'shuk, that the animal shouldn't go in the marketplace. V'yomram, people will say, zui sheniskal ploni al yada, that this animal caused so-and-so to be stoned. That's essentially the reason of kolon, of shame. And the Gemara now says, my lav, is it not? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis.